When my family moved to the new house on Elm Street, I thought it was perfect. It had a big backyard, a tree house, and even a small pond. But what I didn't know was that the house came with something else, something sinister. It started a few weeks after we settled in. I was in bed, half asleep, when I heard it for the first time, a faint ringing, like an old-fashioned telephone coming from somewhere downstairs. I sat up and listened. The house was silent, except for that eerie ringing, which seemed to echo through the walls. I got out of bed and tiptoed to my parents' room. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, but they were both sound asleep. The ringing stopped just as suddenly as it had started, leaving me in the silence of the night. I went back to bed, convincing myself it was a dream. The next night, it happened again. The same old-fashioned ringing, distant yet clear, as if it were coming from a far corner of the house. This time, I was certain I wasn't dreaming. I crept downstairs, my heart racing with every step. I followed the sound through the dark hallway until I reached the basement door. Here, the ringing was louder and more insistent. I hesitated for a moment before slowly pushing the door open. The basement was pitch black, and the only light came from the top of the stairs. I fumbled for the switch and flicked it on. The room filled with a dim, flickering light. The old rotary phone sat on a dusty wooden table, a relic left by the previous owners. I stared at it, my skin prickling with unease. The phone rang again, louder than before, as if it were screaming for attention. Against my better judgment, I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" I whispered. There was silence on the other end, followed by a faint crackling static. And then there was a voice, a whisper that made my blood run cold. "Why did you come here?" I dropped the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. I ran back upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I told my parents, but they dismissed it as a prank or my imagination. "It's an old house," my dad said. "You're just getting used to the new noises." But it wasn't just the house. The phone calls continued night after night. Each time, the voice on the other end grew louder, more insistent. "You don't belong here," it would hiss. "You need to leave." One night, fed up with the lack of sleep and the constant fear gnawing at my insides, I decided to confront whoever, or whatever, was behind the calls. I waited for the ringing, and when it came, I bolted down the stairs, nearly tearing the basement door off its hinges in my rush. I grabbed the phone and shouted into the receiver, "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice was clearer this time, a child's voice, barely more than a whisper. "You need to leave. It's not safe here." "Why?" I demanded, with fear and frustration boiling over. "Why isn't it safe?" There was a pause, and then the voice, trembling and afraid, replied, "Because he's coming. He's coming for you." Suddenly, the lights in the basement went out, plunging me into darkness. I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, coming from somewhere deep within the basement. I dropped the phone and backed up against the wall, my breath hitching in my throat. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice cracking with terror. The footsteps grew closer, heavier. I turned to flee, but the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut with a deafening bang, locking me in the darkness. The footsteps stopped. The basement was silent, save for my ragged breathing. And then just behind me, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. "Leave," the voice whispered, but this time it was different. Darker, more menacing. I turned around, but there was nothing there. Just shadows. I bolted up the stairs, pounding on the door, screaming for my parents. The door flew open and my dad stood there, looking bewildered. "What's going on?" he asked. I tried to explain about the phone, the voice, and the footsteps, but he shook his head. "It's just your imagination," he insisted, but I could see the fear in his eyes. That was the last time I went down to the basement. But the calls didn't stop. They grew more frequent, more urgent. And then one night they stopped altogether. I thought maybe it was over. Maybe whatever it was had finally given up. But then late one night the phone rang again. This time the phone rang from my room, not from the basement. I picked it up with trembling hands. "Hello?" I whispered. There was a long pause, and then the voice, colder than ever, said, "He's here." The line went dead and I dropped the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. The lights flickered, and then, in the hallway's darkness, I saw him. A tall figure, cloaked in shadows, slowly moving towards me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I backed up against the wall, my eyes wide with terror. The figure reached out a hand, skeletal and pale, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was alone in my room. The house was silent. I told my parents, but they said I must have been dreaming. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the phone ringing and the voice whispering, "He's here."